Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a document that argues a metaphorical fog has descended over Brazil, hiding a massive crisis. It tells a story of warnings that went ignored, a huge international showdown, and a final urgent call for people to take action.
Okay, so let's jump right in. To really get what this call to action is about, the source document starts us off in a kind of weird place, not at the beginning, but at the very dramatic end of a long, long story. It's like it wants us to see the explosion first before we figure out how the fuse was even lit. And wow, what an explosion. The document claims that in July of 2025, the US president drops a bombshell, a staggering 50% tariff on everything coming from Brazil. But, the craziest part wasn't the number. It was the name. He called it the Moraes Tariff, naming it directly after a sitting justice on Brazil's Supreme Court, Alexander de Moraes. I mean, that's the big question, right? How on earth does that happen? And the answer, at least according to this document, is this whole story of broken alliances, of warnings that nobody listened to, and a geopolitical storm that was brewing for decades before it finally hit the shore. So how did it get to this point? To answer that, the document says we've got to rewind the clock. We have to look at how the relationship between Brazil and the United States slowly, piece by piece, started to fall apart. This timeline here basically maps out what the source calls a slow-motion decay of an alliance. You can see it highlights these key moments that just created cracks in the foundation. First, a big economic shift toward China, then actively fighting against U.S. trade policy, even denying extradition requests. According to the document, every single one of these events just added another brick to this growing wall of mistrust in Washington. And that brings us to today. This is where the source claims all those simmering tensions finally just boiled over and erupted into this open confrontation and what it calls an absolute avalanche of sanctions. So the source points to these specific moments right here, where Brazil's internal political fights started spilling over the border. It wasn't just a domestic issue anymore. The moment Brazilian authorities try to use Interpol to grab a critic on U.S. soil, or when a judge starts issuing global censorship orders, well, that forces other countries to sit up and pay attention. And this slide, this really shows what the document calls a major turning point. It points out how these huge global publications, which it says used to be pretty supportive of Brazil's judiciary, suddenly started publishing some incredibly harsh critiques. That shift in the global story is presented as a massive red flag. Now, this right here, this is the move that the source argues was a critical escalation. See, these weren't just orders for inside Brazil. They were global demands sent to companies in the US and internationally. That was seen as a direct attack on other countries' laws and their core beliefs about free speech. And the American government's response, as quoted in the text, was totally direct. It was completely unambiguous. This wasn't some quiet diplomatic message. It was a loud and public declaration that a Brazilian judge's power stops at the U.S. border. That, right there, set the stage for a huge showdown. Okay, so to really understand what happens next, you have to know about this one crucial tool in U.S. foreign policy, the Global Magnitsky Act. It's not about trade or business disputes. It's a really powerful law made to punish specific individuals, not countries, but people, accused of serious human rights violations, anywhere in the world. The document then lays out the response as this rapid-fire chain of punishments. As you can see, it says it starts with visa bans, then moves to public call-outs and economic warnings, and then it escalates to that massive Moraes tariff, and finally to the personal sanctions we're about to get to. And there it is, one minister. According to the document, the U.S. Treasury uses that Magnitsky Act to personally sanction Minister Moraes for serious human rights abuses. Just like that, a single act freezes all his assets and completely cuts him off from the entire U.S. financial system. And the fallout, according to this text, was immediate and severe. Official communication channels were just shut down, military cooperation between the two countries suspended. The State Department even put out a public warning, basically telling the entire global financial world to stay far away from a sitting justice on Brazil's highest court. So, after laying out this whole dramatic history of crisis and collapse, the source document finally gets to its real purpose, a passionate, really urgent call to action, all centered on Brazil's Independence Day, September 7th. And this, right here, is the core of the whole appeal.
The author argues that protesting in Brazil's capital is basically pointless. The audience for this demonstration isn't the Brazilian government, it's the world's major powers. The goal is to send a signal, loud and clear, to the rest of the world that the things happening in Brasilia do not represent what the Brazilian people actually want. So the text pretty much frames the whole situation as this stark choice between two possible futures. It says Brazil can keep going down its current road, which the author calls the Venezuela model, leading to total isolation and crippling sanctions. Or the people can show that they want to be a reliable partner to the West, choosing a path of cooperation and stability instead. This quote from the document really nails the strategy. The argument isn't about asking for some foreign country to come in and save the day. Not at all. It's actually a preemptive move to show the world that the Brazilian people are allies, not adversaries, and hopefully stop even harsher actions from being taken against the country. So the call to action lays out these specific goals, but it frames them not as political demands for one side or the other, but as these fundamental principles that are essential to pull the country back from what it calls civilizational regression. It's urging people to look past figures like Lula or Bolsonaro and think about the future of the nation itself. And the stakes, as they're presented in this text, well, they couldn't be any higher. The author paints a really grim picture of what might happen if this appeal doesn't work. A future where life gets way more expensive, where essential services just disappear, and where the country is cut off from the Western world in a way it has never been before. And the document doesn't end with a statement. It ends with this direct and really provocative question. After laying out the entire argument, from the very first cracks in the alliance all the way to the brink of catastrophe, it leaves the final decision with you, the reader, asking you to think about the weight of it all. So are you going to stand still?